I used to think that people who checked under their beds were fools. I was 34 years old. I had a mortgage. I paid taxes. I changed my own oil. Fear of the dark was something I had left in childhood, along with training wheels and the belief that adults knew what they were doing. I am writing this now because I need someone to know what happened in the house on Delmar Road, and I am writing it carefully, without exaggeration, because the truth is already more than enough. My name is not important. What matters is that I am a precise person. I am an engineer. I measure things. I do not embellish. In October of 2019, I was assigned to a 6-month project in a city I had never visited, and my company arranged temporary housing in a residential neighborhood that looked exactly like every other residential neighborhood in that part of the country. 2-story houses, attached garages, yards that nobody used. The house they rented for me was furnished. The previous occupant had left in a hurry, or so the property manager told me when she handed over the keys. She said it with a smile that did not reach her eyes, and then she drove away before I had finished unloading my car. I noticed the smell first. Not rot, not mold, nothing biological. It was chemical, faint, like the inside of a camera bag or a darkroom. I opened windows. By the second day, I had stopped noticing it. I worked long hours. I came home after dark, heated whatever was in the freezer, and was in bed by 10. The house was quiet in the way that unfamiliar houses are quiet, which is to say, it had its own sounds that I had not yet learned to ignore. The refrigerator cycled, the heating vents ticked. The wood contracted in the cold. I cataloged these sounds the way I catalog data. I gave them sources. I moved on. The first thing I cannot explain happened on my 9th night there. I woke at 2 a.m. for no reason I could identify and lay in the dark staring at the ceiling. The bedroom door was open. I always sleep with the bedroom door open. Through the doorway I could see the top of the stairs and a portion of the hallway, lit faintly by the streetlight coming through the window at the end of the hall. I was looking at that rectangle of gray light when I became aware that the proportions of the hallway were wrong. I do not mean that the walls had moved. I mean that something was standing at the top of the stairs that interrupted the geometry I had memorized. It was not a dramatic silhouette. It was not a figure with a face. It was a displacement, a vertical density in the space where there should have been only air and pale light. I stared at it. My brain ran through the list. A coat I had hung somewhere. A trick of shadow from a passing car. I had hung no coat near the stairs. There were no passing cars at that hour on that street. The shape did not move. I did not move. I am not certain how long we held that arrangement, but at some point, became aware that my hands were clenched around the edge of the mattress hard enough to cramp. I reached out slowly and turned on the bedside lamp. The hallway was empty. I got up. I walked the entire house. I checked every room, every closet, the garage, nothing. I went back to bed and lay with the light on until morning. I told myself it was sleep paralysis, though I had not been paralyzed. I told myself it was hypnagogic hallucination, though I had been fully awake. I am an engineer. I require an explanation. I manufactured one, and I went to work. 3 days later, I came home to find the kitchen chair moved. This sounds trivial. It is not trivial if you understand how I live. I am compulsive about order. The chair belonged under the left side of the kitchen table. It's tucked in at a precise angle because the right side was against the wall and I always sat on the left. When I came in that evening, the chair was pulled out and turned slightly, as though someone had just stood up from it. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a long time. Then I checked every door and window in the house. All locked. No sign of entry. Nothing taken. I told myself I had left the chair that way in the morning rush. I knew I had not. I began keeping a log. An engineer's log, dated, timed, factual. Over the following 3 weeks, I recorded 14 incidents. A cup moved from the right side of the sink to the left. A book I had placed on the coffee table found on the kitchen counter. The bathroom mirror, which I checked each morning because I am vain and because it was clean when I arrived. Developing a smear across the lower left corner that I wiped off and found again the next day in the same position. The smell intensifying on certain nights with no correlation to weather or ventilation. And 3 more times at 2 a.m. or close to it, the shape at the top of the stairs. I reviewed my log. I looked for patterns. The incidents clustered around the middle of the week. They were always small. Nothing broke. Nothing was destroyed. Nothing was left that hadn't already been there. Whatever was happening was operating at the edge of deniability. Which is the detail that frightens me most when I think about it now, because that implies a calibration, an awareness of exactly how much I would dismiss. I called the property manager in the 4th week. I asked about the previous tenant. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said he had relocated unexpectedly and that the company had handled everything. I asked if there had been any complaints about the property. She said the house had been inspected and was in excellent condition. I asked if anyone had died there. She said she was not at liberty to discuss the property's history, but that I was welcome to submit a maintenance request if there was a specific issue. I submitted no maintenance request. What would I have written? I began sleeping with all the lights on. My electricity bill was enormous, and I did not care. The light did not stop the shape from appearing, but it made the hallway legible, which meant I could see clearly what I had previously only half seen in the dark, which was that the shape, when it was there, was not quite touching the floor. I measured this. I am an engineer. I stood at the top of the stairs at noon on a Saturday with a tape measure and marked the baseboard at what I estimated was the bottom edge of the shape, 3 inches off the floor. I have that measurement written in my log. 3 inches. I don't know why that number is the thing that stays with me, but it is. The incident that ended my time in that house happened on a Tuesday in late November. I came home at 7 in the evening, made dinner, read for an hour, and went to bed. I woke at exactly 1:58 a.m. I know because I checked my phone the moment I opened my eyes. The shape was not at the top of the stairs. It was in the room. It was at the foot of my bed. I could see it clearly because every light in the house was on. It was the same vertical density, the same wrongness of proportion, the same 3 inches of clearance between its lowest edge and the floor. It was closer than it had ever been. I could not breathe. I am not speaking metaphorically. My diaphragm was locked. I lay on my back and I looked at it, and it did not move, and I did not move, and the only thing in my mind was the measurement. 3 inches, 3 inches, 3 inches. As though the precision of it was the only thing I had left to hold on to. Then it moved toward me. Not quickly. Not dramatically. It simply reduced the distance between us by what I estimate was 2 feet. And the smell hit me all at once. The darkroom smell. Sharp and chemical and very close. And whatever had been locking my chest released all at once, and I came off the bed sideways, and I ran. I ran down the stairs and out the front door in my socks and undershirt in November, and I sat in my car in the driveway. And I locked the doors, and I did not go back inside. I called my supervisor at 2 in the morning. I told him I had a family emergency. I drove to a hotel 12 miles away and checked in and sat on the bed until the sun came up. I arranged with my company to work remotely for the remainder of the project. I sent a courier for my clothes and laptop, and I paid for every day remaining on the lease because I would not go back. The property manager called to ask if everything was satisfactory. I said the house was fine and that my circumstances had changed. She said she understood. She said it in the same tone she had used when she smiled at me with a smile that didn't reach her. Eyes on the day she handed me the keys. And I think now that she did understand, that she understood precisely. and that this is the worst part of all of it. Not the shape, not the smell, not the 3 inches of clearance, but the knowledge that she handed me those keys anyway and drove away. I moved into the house on a Tuesday, which I remember because the moving truck driver told me Tuesdays were bad luck and laughed like it was a joke. The house was in a quiet neighborhood outside of Portland. It's one of those streets where the trees grow too, close together, and the yards are long enough that you can't quite see your neighbor's doors. I had rented it sight unseen after my divorce, which tells you something about where my head was at the time. The landlord, a man named Gerald Foss, had emailed me the keys in a lockbox code and never once showed up in person. I thought that was convenient. I stopped thinking that after the 3rd week. The first thing I noticed was the smell in the basement. Not rot, not mold, something cleaner than that, almost chemical, like a hospital corridor scrubbed too hard. I told myself it was old pipes. The second thing I noticed was that the previous tenant had left behind a pair of child's shoes near the water heater. Small red sneakers, maybe a size 4, laces tied neatly together as though someone had set them down and intended to come back. I put them in a trash bag without thinking too much about it. I had enough of my own wreckage to manage without inheriting someone else's. My daughter Maya visited on the 3rd weekend. She was 8, and she stayed in the room at the end of the hall, the one with the window that looked out over the backyard. I made her bed with the yellow sheets she liked, and we ordered pizza and watched a film she'd already seen 4 times. Around 2 in the morning, I heard her door open. I was still awake. I hadn't been sleeping well since the move, and I heard her feet in the hall. That soft, uneven padding that children make. I assumed she was going to the bathroom. Waited. She didn't come back for 11 minutes. I counted. When she came back, I heard her door close, and I told myself it was nothing. In the morning, she ate her cereal and didn't mention it, and I didn't ask. That afternoon, while she was in the yard, I went to the bathroom at the end of the hall and looked inside. The window above the bathtub was open. It had not been open the night before. The screen was undamaged. I closed it and locked it and stood there for a moment, looking at the white tile and the silence, and then I went downstairs and sat in the kitchen until Maya came inside asking for water. That night, I lay in bed and listened to the house. Every house has its own rhythm once you live in it long enough, the specific knock of the heating system, the way certain floorboards answer to temperature change, the particular silence that collects at 4 in the morning. I was learning this house's rhythm, and what I kept hearing, beneath all of it, was a faint repetition. Not a knock, not a drip. A soft, unhurried sound, like something being dragged across the floor of the basement in a slow, deliberate circle. I went down once. I turned on every light. The basement was empty. The chemical smell was stronger that night, and I stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long time before going back to bed. I did not sleep. Maya went home on Sunday, and the house was quiet in the particular way that houses with children in them become quiet once the children leave. I called my sister that evening and told her the house felt strange, and she said all new places feel strange, and I said yes. That's probably it, and we talked about other things. I did not tell her about the shoes, or the bathroom window, or the sound in the basement. I didn't know how to put it into words that didn't make me sound like someone who needed more sleep and fewer problems. So I kept it to myself. 3 days later, I came home from work at 6:30 and found the back door unlocked. I was certain I had locked it. I am the kind of person who locks doors. I do it deliberately. I turn the handle after to confirm. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the door, and then I looked at the rest of the ground floor, and everything was exactly as I'd left it. Nothing disturbed, nothing missing, only the door. I called Gerald Foss. He didn't answer. I left a message. He didn't call back. I bought a chain lock the next morning and installed it myself and felt only slightly stupid doing it. The following week, I started finding things moved. Small things. A coffee mug I always kept on the left side of the drying rack, on the right. My laptop charger coiled differently than I coil it. A book I kept face down on my nightstand turned face up. Each thing alone was nothing. Together, they made a cold weight in my chest that I carried with me for days. I began photographing my apartment before I left for work each morning. I told myself it was to satisfy my own paranoia, to prove to myself that I was imagining it. The photographs did not prove that. On the 9th day of photographs, the kitchen chair that I kept tucked under the table on the far right was tucked under the table on the far left. The timestamp on the previous evening's photo and the timestamp on the morning photo left a window of 7 hours. I had been home for all 7 hours. I had heard nothing. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked and a glass of water on the floor just inside it, so that if the door opened in the night, I would hear it. I slept poorly, and the water stayed undisturbed, and I woke each morning feeling as though I had been watched rather than rested. I called Gerald Foss 4 more times over 2 weeks. On the 5th call, he answered. I told him about the smell in the basement and the unlocked door and said I needed to know about the previous tenant. He was quiet for a moment that lasted too long, and then he said the previous tenant had moved out suddenly, and that he hadn't had time to do a full inspection before I moved in, and that he could have someone come look at the basement if I was concerned. I asked him directly, was there anything about this house I should know? He said no. His voice did not change when he said it. That was the most frightening thing he could have done. I don't know why I didn't leave then. I've thought about it since. I think I was in that particular state that follows a difficult year, where you begin to distrust your own perceptions and assume the fault is always internal. I had been wrong about my marriage. I had been wrong about a number of things. I was used to being the unreliable one in my own story. It was 4 in the morning on a Wednesday when I finally understood that I was not imagining anything. I woke without knowing why, which is its own kind of alarm, that sudden, breathless waking with no dream to explain it. I lay still and listened. The house was quiet. Then, from the hallway, from just outside my locked bedroom door, I heard breathing. Slow and steady and entirely patient, as though whatever was doing it had been standing there for a long time and had no interest in doing anything other than standing there. I did not move. I could not have told you how long I lay like that, listening to something breathe on the other side of my door. The glass of water on the floor had not moved. The door handle had not turned. There was only the breathing, steady as a clock. In the morning, in the full light of 8 o'clock, I got up and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The carpet showed nothing. I packed 2 bags and drove to my sister's house, without calling first, and sat in her kitchen while she made coffee and asked me what happened, and I told her everything from the beginning. The shoes, the window, the sounds, the breathing, all of it. She listened without interrupting, which is not something she normally does. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she asked me if I had ever gone into every room of the basement. I told her there was only one room. She pulled out her phone and searched the address and turned the screen toward me. The listing showed a floor plan. The basement had 2 rooms. There was a door in the wall behind the water heater, set back behind a wooden shelf unit that I had never seen because I had never looked. I never went back to retrieve the rest of my things. Gerald Foss kept the deposit. I considered that a fair price. I found my father's journal 3 weeks after we buried him. It was tucked behind a loose brick in the basement wall, wrapped in a grocery bag that had gone brittle with age. I almost didn't open it. I wish I hadn't. My father was a quiet man, the kind who fixed things around the house without being asked, and never raised his voice in 30 years of marriage. He died of a stroke, the doctor said, sudden and clean, no suffering. That was the version we held on to. The journal changed that. His handwriting was small and careful in the early pages, dated entries going back almost 8 years. He wrote about ordinary things at first, grocery lists bleeding into observations about the neighbors, notes about the garden, brief complaints about his knees. Then, around the 4th month of entries, something shifted. He wrote, "The sound came back last night. I don't know where it originates. It is below the register of anything I can identify. I feel it more than hear it." Margaret slept through it. I did not sleep at all. I read that twice and put the journal down. I went upstairs and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching the backyard. My father had spent 20 years maintaining. The grass was already losing its edge without him. I went back down. The entries that followed were still measured, still written in his careful hand, but the content had changed completely. He described waking at the same time every night, between 2 and 3 in the morning, to a sensation he called pressure without source. He wrote about standing in the hallway outside the bedroom he shared with my mother and feeling certain that something was standing at the other end of it. In the dark, near the linen closet. He never saw anything. He was precise about that, almost defensive. I see nothing. I want to be clear that I see nothing. But the certainty of presence was, in his words, total. I kept reading. Over the following months, his entries became more frequent, and the handwriting stayed controlled, but the content grew harder to read. Not because of anything dramatic, but because of how mundane he kept it. He wrote about it the way he wrote about a leak under the sink, methodically, without hysteria, which somehow made it worse. He noted that the sensation had begun occurring during the day as well, most often in the basement, which he described as having developed what he called a change in quality that he couldn't attribute to temperature or light. He wrote, "It is not that the room feels threatening. It is that the room feels attended." I set the journal on my knee and looked around the basement. The water heater clicked. The single bulb above me was doing what single bulbs do in basements, throwing more shadow than light. I was aware of how quiet the house was. My mother was staying with my sister in Portland. I was here alone to sort through things, the official reason. Though the real reason was that I needed to be in the house one more time before we sold it. I needed something I couldn't name. I looked back at the journal. His entries from the following year were the most difficult. He had started leaving the bedroom at night, not because something drove him out, but because he felt, as he wrote it, that his presence in the bed was being noted. He slept on the couch for 11 months without telling my mother. He wrote about watching her sleep through the cracked bedroom door, and feeling grateful that whatever attention had settled on the house seemed focused on him specifically. He wrote, "I do not think it means harm. I think it is simply aware of me. I am not sure which of those is worse." He began to document small things. A drawer that he knew he had closed, found open in the morning. A smell in the basement that came and went, which he described as mineral, like wet stone after a long rain. Shadows that resolved wrong when he turned on a light, as if something had been standing somewhere that standing things don't stand. He was careful to note alternative explanations each time. The drawer could have been him. The smell was likely the water table. Shadows do strange things when you're not sleeping. He entertained every rational exit and then quietly closed each door. Near the end of the journal, about 4 months before he died, his tone changed once more. Not to fear exactly, but to something I can only describe as resignation mixed with a terrible intimacy. He wrote about the presence the way you write about a condition you've learned to live with. Acknowledged, incorporated, no longer fought. He wrote, "It stands at the foot of the stairs now when I come down at night." I say stands. I don't know what the correct word is. It occupies the space at the foot of the stairs. I have stopped turning the light on. there is no point. Seeing or not seeing changes nothing about what is there. I sat with that for a long time. The water heater clicked again, and I flinched and hated myself for flinching. I read the last 4 entries standing up, which I did without deciding to. He wrote about speaking to it once, not words exactly, just an acknowledgement, a nod in the dark at the foot of the stairs. He wrote that he felt something change after that. Not better, not worse, just different. The way a room changes when 2 people in it finally admit they know each other. He wrote, "I think it has been here longer than we have. I think it was here when we moved in with the children, and it simply waited. I don't know what it's waiting for now. I know it is still waiting." The second to last entry was dated 6 days before his stroke. He wrote that he had stopped sleeping almost entirely and that he no longer felt frightened, which he did not experience as relief. He wrote, "The absence of fear is not the same as safety. I am not afraid because I have accepted the terms of something I don't understand. That is not peace." The last entry was 4 lines. He wrote, "It was at the bedside last night. Margaret didn't wake. It looked at me for a long time, if looking is the word, if it has anything like eyes, if time works the same way in whatever it is. I looked back. I don't know what that means for either of us." I closed the journal. I was standing at the foot of the stairs without remembering walking there. The basement light was behind me. The staircase went up into the house, into the dark of the first floor, because I hadn't left any lights on up there. I stood at the foot of the stairs for what felt like a long time. I want to tell you, I felt nothing. I want to say the house was just a house, and my father was an old man, who didn't sleep and whose mind had started fraying at the edges in ways none of us caught. I want to give you that. I can't. I stood at the foot of the stairs in my father's house, and I felt, with a certainty that had no visual or auditory component, no evidence I could point to, no single thing I could write down and defend in daylight, that I was not alone at the bottom of those stairs. I did not turn around. I don't know if that was courage or its opposite. I walked up the stairs without looking back, turned on every light I passed, and sat in the kitchen until morning came and the feeling either left or learned to hide better. I sold the house 2 months later. I told my mother it was the right time. The market was good. There was no point holding on to property neither of us needed. She agreed easily, which surprised me. On the last day, when I handed the keys to the realtor in the driveway, my mother touched my arm and said, almost to herself, that she had always felt like that house had someone else in it. I asked her what she meant. She thought about it for a moment and then said she didn't know how to explain it. Just a feeling, nothing specific, probably nothing. I nodded. I didn't tell her about the journal. I still haven't. I keep it in the drawer of my nightstand now, which I understand is not a rational decision. I keep it because I'm not done with it, or it's not done with me, and I'm not sure anymore that those are different things.